Welcome to Esoteric Thoughts. Today I have the privilege of welcoming back to the channel Michael Tsarion. And today we're going to be talking about the psychology of belief and faith.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much again. This will be a little shorter and sweeter than the one we did of philosophy of belief and faith, although that was important too, but my God, is that heady. This one will be a lot more simple. The psychology of people have looked into it. I just like to make it real brief and one-on-one for people. And that is, because remember, in order to be a believer in the Quran or to be a believer in, anything, Taoism, even Hinduism, Jainism, whatever. In fact, and even to be an atheist still involves a lot of belief. Well, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in all your Christian stuff. Well, what do you believe in? Well, I believe in science. Right. So that's interesting. And if I go to a scientist, I'll get very much the same kind of thing. So belief, belief that the sun will rise in the morning, so what is all of this? Can we dive into the psychology of belief and faith? Because my goodness, if we did and we found some heavy reasons for it, right, we would go, hey, all you critics, all you skeptics, you're all wrong, and there's a reason why at the end of their lives, great men, Tolstoy, whoever, will convert because they see the light and they realize, T.S. Eliot, the great poet, lived as most of his life as an atheist or agnostic, and then converts to Anglican Church toward the end, for reasons probably best known to himself and all. But we want to do all of this deconstruction because we're trying to free people from the tyranny of also religion. And this is when the brave person does take it into their head to say, look, I've been a believer for years, but I've had also doubts for years. I've been a believer and I've been as devout, and all my friends are Christians and my community is Christian. I almost know nothing else. And I almost know nothing else except for the bubble that I've been in of Christian belief. But as I've grown, I've got deeper questions about myself, about hangups, about, and then the metaphysical questions. And I see these atheists, they seem so certain and sure. And I see these other people, and I see these scientists and the quantum physicists, and I'm hearing all of this stuff, which is not congruent. And then I found out that within the church, there's chicanery, there's crime, there's terrible exploitation. You see, so the little bit more open-minded person then has a task on hand. And so all my work from the astrotheology onwards is to say, I realize how much time you've spent as a believer, and you don't have the same amount of time, and maybe not even the same amount of energy to start saying, look, I've just got to believing in these things, and now everything I know is wrong. Comes up, looms on the road ahead. That's not fair. I spent the best years of my life and not only intellectually studying the Bible and the Apocrypha, but I've given all my emotions to it. And there's been certain benefits out of that because I've got community feeling and I'm doing as my forefathers did. And I haven't stood out, so that I've got perks out of being just a believer in Sosign, but which is conventional things. But at the same time, I've been nagged with doubts. And if God is good and God, well, why did my wife or husband leave me? And why is my kid born with meningitis? And, and why is the world in the horrific state that it is? Why do all the enemies of God still exist? I thought my Vatican was powerful. I thought my Christianity was powerful. And yet I see on the rise all sorts of antithetical things to that religion. Well, my God looks kind of like flabby here, so you get all of these different questions arising. So I just try to keep it simple because I know that people don't have the time. Now, if you go to psychology, then they describe, of course, the growth of the child. Freud took it from about 2 years old and went through these 5 important stages, which are called the Oedipus stages. Very interesting to study those. And they finish around 6 and 7 when there's a good grasp of the world. Child is already in school by that time. And so there's a good grasp of the external reality out there. Daddy is not just a word I use for that man. In my family, I found that everybody calls daddy, daddy. Well, wait a minute. Hold on. I thought that was my private word. You know what I mean? So things like that. Children, and that's just one example. Their worlds are blasted by realizing, oh, all these things I took and the identification I had with my home life. Oh, what is this generality? What is this ubiquitousness? I thought that was private. I thought that was mine. So, the Oedipal stages show you how the learning curve of children and how they sort of move from the seed, of the pleasure principle, as he referred to it, and then moved out. Remember, a lot of these terms were German, they sound better in German. Pleasure principle, that's an English translation. So don't blame Freud for some crappy translations. Just the reality as we know it, the child moves into, and there's lots of changes in their personality. And of course, it must be added that when the word changes, when you see the word itself, daddy or mommy, being sort of universalized, it also affects how you see that man called daddy, because the word and the dad are not that separate. We won't get into all of that, but of course, it's not just your little bit of a shock value when you find out that what, it's also changes reciprocally. It sort of changes the image of the people involved in your head. But Freud's secretary for 22 years, Otto Rank, who's very familiar with all of these theories, sort of took it back to almost the fetal. In fact, he wrote a book called The Trauma of Birth and went back even earlier, which set up a new school of philosophy, psychology, that started to look at this, like pediatricians, do at the very earliest moments of after conception, the germ, as it were, what's happening chemically, what's happening neuronally, nervously, and of course psychologically, and all of that. And is it right to give all these drugs to the mother during the time? Is it right to have cesarean section and God knows all these things, right? But the ones who looked into the earliest, and one of them was Julia Kristeva, she's an important name. She also started looking back, and she called this very early moment just after birth the semiotic. And that's a word borrowed from the study of linguistics. And all it means is sign language, really. It's that the child is still, quite far away from any, what she calls symbolic. We're using symbolic now. If I move my hands, if I say the words, it's more of a symbolic gesture, and it's more of a communication is based on symbols because you understand them. If I'm waving, a flag or making the SOS signal, everyone knows what it means, right? Well, just before that is a kind of a semiotic level in which it's like a big amorphous swirl of symbols and information, but the child can't process it. And it's very specific what it can process at that time. And it's mostly to do with the mother. Even the father comes on, his symbolism comes on later. It's all this other semiotic level or stage upon which, this is why it's important, all the other structures rest. She said thetic and symbolic. We're at the symbolic. And so all these later stages of intricate communication, and if you live in London, right, the Cockneys and all this innuendo and all of this extraordinary wordplay that we can fathom, a black humor, a Jewish self-deprecating humor, a subtle humor, right? All of these kinds of humors can be understood, as well as sophisticated language up to computer code, whatever, a Japanese video cassette, manual. Right? We can understand all of this. We can understand advanced manuals and things, astrophysics, but those are all resting on a much earlier primordial moment. And that's what we want to look at a little bit, or just at least factor that in, because this is all pre-Oedipal. So just to make sure that it doesn't start with Freud's Oedipus complex, there is a whole study, coming out of Otto Rank and Melanie Klein and Julia Kristeva about the earliest moments of the formation of consciousness in a child. And we'll need to know all that because, where we're going. All right. But back to Freud again. As a child is moving through these 5 stages, and especially in the early stages, less so in the later part of it, the 6 to 7 years, is what we know as magical child thinking. Right? Magical child syndrome. The reason why it's more in the early years of youth and the infancy is simply because to explain it, all it is when thought, idea or thought and action are considered still one. Now, there are exceptions where somebody even at 7, well, there's exceptions when somebody's even 15 or 18 still has this syndrome, but, let's not worry about that. Normally, in normal stages of the psychosexual development, the earlier you go, you get the magical child thinking. And again, to explain it, it's just when a child is thinking that its thoughts are actions. There's no real separation, very vague, hazy understanding of that. So if mommy gets sick, but 3 days before, 2 weeks before, you had been wishing her dead, And then for some reason, like a couple of days later or a week or later, and by the way, even longer periods, she actually gets sick or gets cancer, is diagnosed. The child will harbor a feeling, it's irrational to us, but at the time the child will harbor this feeling that, oh my God, I willed that. Now, this is in the whole history of childhood, right? Your little, stories of Little Red Riding Hood and, whatever you got, sort of have aspects of this, Hansel and Gretel. You'd be amazed, right? So the child harbors a feeling that it has caused this. And a lot, depending on the child, a great deal of what happens physically to the family, like say the house burns down, but the child was playing with matches before, or again, some ideas of dreams or some fantasy about burning the house down, happened. Now they're completely disengaged. There is no causal relationship, but in the mind of a child, especially in the magical child thinking, there is. And I'm making quite grandiose examples here. It can be all sorts of small things. It can be what the parents even vocalize and say, that the child goes, oh my goodness, so the feeling of I-ness that we all come into the world with is already fraught with, difficulties, not just biological and physical, but also psychological. But I'm just trying to describe magical child thinking. And so in ancient times, magical child thinking was also apparent. The thunder is a god in the sky. We've angered him, we've angered the great god in the sky and all of this. So it's quite a well-documented principle, but it's quite natural for children to have it, for infants to have it, and it'll fade slowly as you get into school, and it comes along with the reality principle. In fact, we know that we have the reality principle because this magical child thinking subsides. But the thing that we want to address, which is so key to viewers, is that it doesn't completely subside. It weakens and it goes away into the unconscious, so to speak. But see, it doesn't completely go away. When you go gambling or you're fixated on gambling, for instance, my horse is going to come in, it will, so I'm spending $80 to make 8. All of this nonsense, right? And so many other aspects of our life. That is appealing to the magical child thinking, or is a symptom of it. Many other things are. In fact, the media, Hollywood, a lot of their advertisements play on not only your hedonism and your sensationalism, but also on I won. It's I wished it, I willed it, I held that lotto ticket. I knew my lucky number 7. Think about the gamblers with their lucky numbers and their lucky colors and all. That is also coming out of magical child thinking. So girls who want some tall, dark, handsome stranger, to come in and sweep them off their feet. I never quite understood what exactly that means, but nevertheless, and all of these other fantasies about your parents being royal figures, and one day it'll be a letter will arrive that says you're related to the royal families of the world, and all this horror will be taken out of your life, and all this want and suffering. That's magical child thinking. So I think people get the idea, and it happens on a very, very subtle level. Wanting a sibling to go away and never come back. If a parent goes on a holiday, there is a desire that they never return. And then when they do, there's a lot of depression and stuff. So it rules the early stages of the Oedipus complex. And allegedly, right, it disappears. But you see, it doesn't disappear completely. It just takes a few steps back. And then based on what we're getting to, is that by teenage years, it can still be around as somebody starts taking religion seriously. Because at the end of the day, faith and belief are manifestations of this magical child thinking. And that's why most clergymen don't want you to know anything about psychology. Theology and psychology are often kept apart, and anybody who tried to, blend the two over, I don't know, Paul Tillich or whoever, anybody who tried to blend over the two was dismissed. The churches never liked it. The Protestants don't like it. They'll all suffer horrors if you went there. They'll tell it, oh, that's the Jewish science. Sure, we don't want anything to do with that Jewish science. They've tried everything in the book, to stop people from going there. Well, for good reason. So what we have then is faith and belief are the remnants, the detritus, the dregs of the magical child thinking in adults. As we said before, it's perfectly okay for children to have it. It's not perfectly okay for adults to have it because they've been exposed to the reality of the world, the reality principle. They must know that you can't wave a magic wand and have the world do what you want. Try getting other people, stop traffic like some manic person and tell people they've got to, vote for Obama or vote for Trump and see what you get, right? Or anything else. Tell them you got to become vegetarians right now. Your soul depends on it. You see, other people, the reality principle is simply condensed into one phrase. The world don't care about you. It doesn't respond to your mind. And your belief that it does in this more obvious infantile way, of course, is erroneous. So then what we've done is develop other ways to make reality respond to us, knowing that fundamentally there's no such connection. And that's reason, and that's science, and that's will to power, which often gets together with other people's will to power. So we have politics and we have movements and we have charities and all. But if you dissect all of that, it's still an affirmation of your own impotency in the schoolyard, and the chorus of voices. And everybody says, well, if I do what you want me to do, that gives me the right to tell you to do what I want you to do. Right? And that's evident. So you go, well, I'm not going to tell a lot of people what to do because then they just tell me, yeah, well, I don't like your smell either. You got to change your ways. Don't be a mod, be a rocker. Don't be a rocker, be a mod. I mean, you see, so we find out very quickly that reality does not respond to my needs. But the lurking, that can also, give you a pang, and then you sort of, the magical child thinking can awaken at any time. It's very, very strong with women, more than it is with men, historically speaking. And so this fluffy nonsense, and a lot of ignorance in both sexes about how the world even works, what science is, you'd find this in people. And also the governments, the big brother will make use of this through their advertisements, which are filled with messages to the magical child thinking. And sadly, women give way to it much more than men do, that critical apparatus. And that's because they birthed the child. They're the ones who are in charge of the semiotic. When you talk about semiotic levels, hell, when you talk about Oedipus stages, you're really talking about the dominion and the will of the mother. So, that has some negative consequences as well. So when time comes when there'll be this more awakening of religion, like we've seen in the last 2 years with the pandemic, people flood the churches. When there's a couple of school shootings or what, people flood the churches, right? Trauma, it's doing this. Why it's doing this is because you so need to feel that there's some control. The rugs are being pulled, and you need to feel that there's some sort of you're losing psychological control. And the moment that happens, if somebody pulls the rug, like a mountain climber on the hill, you've got to test and hold on to those ropes with dear life. And for Catholics, it'll be Catholicism, back to the church. Protestants, the same, the familiar. But behind it is this magical child syndrome. So now let's pull it back out to the biggest level of religion in general, wherever it's found. Wherever it's found, this is the case. People die in my family. People die around me. I'm afraid personally of death. All of these things not only regress you to a much more primitive state, phylogenetically and ontogenetically, but they also awaken and stimulate magical child thinking. So those who are still clinging to their faith, we did something on the philosophy of it to show that philosophically it doesn't have much traction. And the man who, was the champion that it did, the plug was pulled on him. It turned out not to be true, that faith and belief have any philosophical grounding at all. And that other philosophers said, well, okay, it doesn't stop us believing in a spirit, but we have to prove it in a different way. We thought this was going to work, but when the hood was opened and we looked inside, we realized, oh no, there's a bit of a spaghetti mess here. Let's start again. And that's what philosophy has done, is tried to find more substantiation for belief in, the sort of more numinous or esoteric. But faith and belief, which has been the mainstay, doesn't have philosophical credibility. Right. So if we realize that faith and belief in the psychology of the growth of the evolution of consciousness also doesn't have any credibility, it's infantile, then, I believe that can help us. That doesn't mean go be an atheist or even an agnostic. It just means start again. Scientists have to start again when their theories, prove bogus. You go back to the drawing board. You have the courage to say, we'll devise a new science that will give us, what we want, the insights we want. religious man must be as flexible. So for some people, this will be, right, that's it. Thank you. I knew something was off, so I'm away. And I'm breaking with anything to do with religion, theology, spirituality, and that can be healthy to clean off the board. It can be healthy to start, to have a blank slate and then maybe distance yourself from it, throw it all over and come back at another time when your own thinking is different. But these things that we're pointing out today are absolutely true, whereas the objects of religion are not true. You can't prove them, you can't falsify them, but this you can. This is in your own children. This is in your childhood. It's why fairy tales exist. It's why kids love stories and fairy tales and cartoons. And especially why there's this hero worship and madness, and the anti-hero and the hero, because that's magical child thinking. That's you trying to be that hero. That's you identifying with that special powers of whoever it is, you see, and quite rightly so at that age. That's part of the introduction to the reality principle. But with the reality principle, and also when the reality principle goes dark, atavistically or regressively, we stimulate the magical child thinking, and we've got to watch it in our own minds. We've got to watch how it works in our own minds. So it's a lot of work. And then you have to observe it in society, that even on the political level, this nonsense about utopias and socialism, and in daily life, it's a study. There's a thing called the magical child syndrome, and there's a very phenomenon in our lives, and it manifests in sort of innocuous ways. Like I said, the lottery and gambling, and thinking you're going to win the pools, or thinking that tomorrow your DNA will prove that you're, a descendant of William the Conqueror or whatever it is. And so you have, or Genghis Khan, as the case may be. So the thing is that, we've got to look in it and note it. Don't crush it. Just observe it. And, new insights about the way that we work with reality emerge. And it's not wrong to have magical child thinking. And it's not wrong to suspend, as Tolkien said, reality when you're going into fantasy and watching a movie. We need all of this. We still need to placate. So that what he called the suspension of disbelief comes in as a very important aspect that opens our minds to all fiction. We couldn't watch science fiction. We wouldn't have Superman, and we wouldn't have all. In fact, you wouldn't have most of the media if you took away magical child thinking and the suspension of disbelief. And people can look both those terms up and read about it. It allows us then to be able to escape into fiction, which serves a very, very important part of our beinghood, but it can also bring us negatives. And one could argue that religion, the whole of it, the whole slew of it, the whole cocktail of what we call religious belief and faith, is one of the negatives of this magical child thinking.
In terms of religious people who look at the Bible in a very literal way, could you then say that this magical child thinking is more prominent in their minds for them to embrace the literalism so much?
Yeah, definitely. Anyone into religion in the first place, it might be activating that. And especially in those who are dogmatic. Although my personal belief is always that I think, when we described how Jews were way back in the first temple, it looks like nobody was really that oppressive in terms of priesthoods for a while. We explored that. As time went by, you get the literalists, especially after the Reformation with Calvin, Knox, Wesley, and Luther. And that just shows insecurity. The more you have to dominate and dictate, the more it looks like you're not really sure of your facts, is where I would go. But after the Reformation, Protestants and that type, the Presbyterians, they start believing in this fundamental way, literally, because of demand. I don't think people of themselves were inclined to take anything literally. No. Medieval man even was highly unliteral. It's absolutely amazing. C.S. Lewis has written some fine books on that. So it was by demand. To answer your question, it really was by, you will read the book literally, even if it's rubbish what you're reading, you will. And this domination of the mind caught on, because you really didn't have any choice. I mean, you went on Sunday, you were demanded to go on Sunday. There was no two ways about it. You were completely pilloried, and you were, you were pilloried if you didn't go to church, as if you were something sort of like you were an insane person, and all of that. So yeah, it's more a case, I would say, of domination, and secondly of saying, okay, I'm conforming, and now that you have to take it literally, you're shutting down part of your brain. You're shutting down, and in fact, you are actually shutting down part of your brain, the right brain, which is metaphorical, which is very plastic and omnidirectional, and naturally lets the images sink in. See, remember, as I say, there's nothing wrong with Jesus as a hero figure. The hero figure is incredibly needed, as is the anti-hero. So when you strip off religious belief from it, I think the Bible becomes more interesting. Who are all of these Sauls and Abrahams and Jacobs and Josephs and the Pharaoh and the struggle and the fight, and there's there's love stories in there, Samson and Delilah and all. Once you get rid of the trappings of the mythmongers, those stories are epic, right? And they are epic, and they're also found in other cultures of the world. The crucified Savior, sure, that's Parsifal, that's the Fisher King, that's Odin, that's with no eye, that's Horus with no eye, that's Set with no testicles. German mythology, there's not a single god who doesn't have a busted arm or broken head, all right, or is cluttered with doubt. They're the most infirm pantheon of gods you can ever imagine. And it's the same thing elsewhere. They're always going through something. Even in Celtic mythology, they're always fighting some strange beast or getting into a joust. They're all wounded and in a bad shape. So the stories are absolutely fascinating. It's the literalisms that shut down that imaginative, intuitive, what does this mean for me? Well, it doesn't mean anything for you. It means what the priest says it means for you. Okay, do as we do. You will have faith in my faith, mate. Most of religion today, Catholic and Protestant, is don't think for yourself. You have faith in me. You have faith. I have faith, and you have faith in me. And the Vatican's even more of this, because there's no precedent to say the Pope is in the way of my relationship with Jesus. At least Luther got that right. But the thing is, the whole thing, the wheels came off anyway. But the Catholics make no bones about it, that, I believe in your faith. I'll have faith in your faith then. Where the hell, it's just unbelievable. So this is just one look, though. The roots of religion, are based in fear. They're based in a very much shrunken sense of selfhood that over the millennia has shrunk back from the natural world and from the workings of the natural world. So there's many things we could go into, and that's why a show like yours is really good, because we can go through it step by step, hopefully without censorship, to explore. This is not threatening to anyone unless they're themselves projecting threat, because their cherished beliefs are actually at the core of themselves quite weak. But I didn't do the 30 years of work on astrotheology and all of this study that went into it before that to put up these sites to turn people into atheists. Oh, no. That's the easy way out for ungenerous detractors. We are exploring, and that takes you into some heavy-duty labyrinthine areas.
Michael Tsarion, thank you.